Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Damodar Mauzo and Vivek Shahbag. Damodar Mauzo is the winner of India's highest literary award, the Jnanpith Award for 2022. His books are short stories and they're typically set in Goa. And this session starts with the launch of his new book, which I'll request Vivek ji and Damodar ji to launch. This is, of course, The Wait and New Stories. That is the new book by Damodar Mauzo. Vivek Shahbag, our very own Vivek Shahbag, writes in Kannada. He's published 5 short story collections, 5 novels, and 3 plays. He was the founding editor of the literary journal Deshakala. Over to you, sir.
The book I just now launched is a wonderful collection of short stories, The Wait and Other Stories. The book is available here. We will have our conversation on not just on the book, but then the writing of Damodar Mauzo. It's my privilege and pleasure to be in conversation with him, a great writer, and someone whom I have been reading for decades. When his Carmelin came, it was quite a sensation, and the book was originally written in Konkani in 1979, got translated into almost all Indian languages around 83, 84, and it was quite a sensational book when I was a student. And his previous book, the novel, which was published 2 years ago in Konkani, which is called, in Konkani it's called Jeev Dimu Ya Chai Maru, which can roughly be translated as should I take my life or have a cup of tea? He is a writer, is amazing writer, for whom the stories just come to him. And we'll talk about it a little later. But before that, there is something, which is unique about Damodar Mauzo, who is, who ran a shop for a living for many, many years. And it is something very different because it was a shop that was in a very small place, Majorda in Goa. And he had done it by choice. It is something, after his graduation, he had many options and then he chose to do this. And now I feel that, the shop was something, it's like an image and it's like a metaphor which is at the center of his writing, which is almost, he's been writing for 50 years. So let us start this conversation about your shop. And how did you get into this? And how the stories, came to you through this?
Well, I write. Whether I write or stories get themselves written from me, I don't know. I'm not very sure. But yes, I finished my graduation in Mumbai. But even before I finished, I started writing. And I write only in Konkani. My creative writing is only in Konkani. The reason is obvious. Of course, one can write or one can express best in his own mother tongue or in his own language. That is one reason. But in Goa, there is a peculiar thing about languages. There is always a controversy, language controversy. Particularly before the opinion poll, I hope you all know about the history of Goa after liberation in 1961. We had to face a referendum. Opinion poll, the only referendum in India so far which has taken place, whether you want to have independent entity or want to merge with Maharashtra. And some of the expansionist forces from the neighboring state, I'm talking about Maharashtra, they wanted to grab the land of Goa and annex it to Maharashtra. And we Goans, the self-respecting Goans, always were for a separate entity, a separate statehood, which we got later. Why I'm telling this? Soon after liberation, I went to Mumbai for higher studies, where I realized that my language is, that is Konkani, it has been suppressed due to historical reasons or geographical reasons. Historical reasons, because Konkani was banned by passing a decree by the Portuguese in 1684. So we had a very, very hard time to even to stay alive. And then secondly, because of geography, that is, after the conversion started in Goa and after the Inquisition, the law of Inquisition was imposed on Goa, there was exodus of people from Goa to the neighboring states, mainly in Karnataka, in the parts South Canara, and then in Kerala and in Maharashtra. So after going to Maharashtra, when I saw the state of Marathi language, then I realized how we are lagging behind. So we struggle to bring up the linguistic standards, the language standard, the literary standard of my language. And my struggle was partly because of language and also because of love of literature.
No, so you came back, there were options for you after your graduation, but you decided to set up a shop. And let's talk about the shop, because shop to me
Yeah.
is like a place where you spent all day and where most of your characters interacted with you in some way.
Yeah, it is not that I set up a shop. It was a family shop. But I had a choice, either to join the government or any other institution. And you can understand 1961, soon after the liberation of Goa, there were lots of job opportunities. And I was easily getting one. But then I decided to run the family shop. For two reasons. Didn't want any restrictions imposed on I wanted to enjoy my freedom. You will ask me, actually many people think that after joining particularly government job, you have a lot of freedom. But then it is not so. I am not of that kind to enjoy freedom at the cost of government money. But then I thought that if I get the work which is my own, if I run a shop, I had the freedom to close the shop and go somewhere, which I would not have got probably if I were in government job. But I prefer to stick to my family business. I never call it business because I'm not a businessman. I'm a shopkeeper, and that too a village shopkeeper. And as you rightly said, because I'm a shopkeeper, I am a writer. Because all of my characters I have met across the counter. It is not a mall. It is not a superstore. It is just a shop where customers come across the counter. But being in a village, most of the customers that came to my counter were known to me or we befriended later. And somehow I find that most of the customers, they prefer to confide in me, talk to me. They enjoyed talking to me. And there were some who gave me characters for my stories and a lot of other things.
When I read his stories, not just this book, but the otherwise, you can see that, that these people are somewhere around Goa. You can meet the driver, you can meet, the shopkeepers, you can meet these officials. It's like, especially I feel it very strongly when I visit Goa that all these people, his characters are somewhere, lurching around there. And it is for example, there is a great story in this book, which is, about a taxi driver who receives his customers, and his engagement with them starts from the time he finds out their name. And if they happen to be, if his customer happens to be Christians, and then he changes his name as Austin. And then if it's a Hindu, he says Yatin, and then, similarly, Yasin. So the way the driver engages with his customers is, he takes them around Goa, and he tells them about the historical monuments and the history of Goa. And he tells them in a manner to please his customers. And I think it's a fantastic story where the history, because it's the same thing, and And there is a guy who comes from Portuguese. He tells, what a great thing the Portuguese have done. Otherwise, Adil Shahi would have, strangled us. And he came and he liberated us. So similarly, to someone else, he says, look, Adil Shahi is such a cruel fellow. Because of him, this is what happened to us. It's the same monument. It's the same thing. But the driver, the way he depicts things to his customers is something, wonderful. And the story, of course, goes further. I'm not going to tell you the end because it's the most interesting end. But that is Mauzo. That is, the kind of characters and the stories. One of his stories ends in a very interesting manner, which is in which he says, I wrote what came to my mind. You decide whether it's a story or something else. And I want to ask you this, keeping this in the background. So you've been writing for 50 years, and what has this journey been like? Your literary journey.
Nothing much about it, because I sometimes have my own regrets. I've been writing, as you said, my first story was written in 1963, which became a hit then. Then, over the 49 years that I have been writing, I have hardly written 100 stories, which means 2 stories a year, which is a very poor output, in my opinion. But one thing, I write only when I have to write. So when I have to write, I take the pen. So that is one reason why I did not come. I am not a very I have not written so profusely. But then, yes, I wait for the right theme to come to me, right story come to me, and that is why you talked about that story about the driver. Let me tell you something about it. Yasin, Yatin, Austin are the 3 names. We have seen how people play cast cards these days. So it is on the same basis. It so happened that a team of filmmakers had come to make a biopic on me. And they had engaged a taxi. And they were looking for some locations. So they called me to join them for a location shooting. So I went with them. They made me sit in front. And I wanted to talk to the driver, local driver. So I just asked him, what's your name? And he took nearly about 10 seconds to answer to this simple question. It should have come immediately to him. Then I was wondering, why is he taking so long? Is it because he wants to know who I am and to what name should be told to me? So then I went back and I forgot. But then that is the genesis of the story. When you see the people, then your imagination starts. So that is how the process has been going on. You are talking about journey. I am happy that I am on the right track. You see, I started in 1963. From there, today, where I am, I think it is a path of progression from my point of view and from what critics say. So the day I will feel that I have nothing more to say, I will stop writing. But I am little bit apprehensive whether I'll have enough time to finish what I have been writing. Some publishers are after me to write my autobiography, which I have declined because as long as I have something new to give, I will not go for that.
The name of this collection is The Weight and Other Stories. And I think it has some significance. If you look at his stories, especially the one in this collection, there is a weight. There is a weight, the characters wait. Some of them wait for 30 years. And this weight, that space, because the relationships happen in our imagination. They don't happen physically. Because you wait for somebody, you wait for to hear from someone, and that's where the relationships happen. And I felt when I was reading this and reading at these characters and that weight of some of these characters, It was almost like a response to the way in which the world has changed, the speed with which the world is operating today. So, and also there are the diversity of these stories. I really, surprised to see there are so many Catholics in your stories. Is there any reason for this?
No, I live in a village which is um, where most of the villagers are Catholics, predominantly Catholic village. And I grew up playing football with them, doing my Portuguese schooling with them, and then later. But then I never felt they are the other. Neither they felt me as the other. So that we have that camaraderie, we have that friendly atmosphere in my village. Uh, and I'll give you, sir, I'll tell you one thing. I think it's bringing up of me, by my parents and my family or my friends. That has helped me. One example I'll give you, which I have been giving this example to others because that is the basis why I am like this. When I was a child, maybe 1 year and plus, my mother was still breastfeeding me. And one day, it was a Sunday morning, and the practice is, my house is next to the road. So people who go to the mass, at the church, they return by the same path. So my mother was watering the plants in the garden in front, and one day, a neighbor woman was coming back from the mass, and she always would say hello to her. And she found my mother was not there. My mother was sick with some fever. And because she was sick, she had fever, she could not breastfeed me. As a result, I was crying baby that time. So when this lady inquired, where is my mother? She said, no, she was told that she is sick. So she entered just to say hello, how are you? And then she heard me crying. So why is the baby crying? She was told that mother, since she is not well, she cannot breastfeed him and he won't have any other thing. So she said, okay, bring him here. And she had already given birth to a boy, another boy, and she breastfed me. Just imagine, she, a Catholic girl, going to the mass, returning from the mass, she meets my mother and prefers or offers to breastfeed a baby from a Hindu family. How can it happen? And how is it tolerated? Elsewhere, I don't know whether it would have been possible. So this kind of atmosphere that I have seen in my own house, I think that is the basis why I never find the other people as the other. And I have been brought up with them, and most of my customers are Catholics, most of my friends are Catholics. I have access to my friends' kitchens. When I go to eat to my friends, I go to their kitchen and eat. So that relationship that I have with my villagers prompt me to choose the characters from that community. I was not aware that until people brought to my notice that I have been writing about Catholic lifestyle. For me, it is a lifestyle that exists in my village. So that is the reason I think most of the characters you find in my stories, even Carmeline cannot happen to others. And the lifestyle that our village has is slightly different from the other side. Hindus and Catholics live a parallel life in Goa. They intermingle very easily outside at society, but in family level, very little. But then in my house, it was different. So that is the reason I think most of the characters I have. And since I have a very close relationship, my bosom friend is a Catholic. So I know what are their problems. So I can easily deal with the problems. Carmeline is dealing with women going to Gulf as ayahs. And that was the period, 1960 plus, after East Africa was liberated. Most of the countries were liberated then, we got independence. And many Goans who lived in East Africa There were many, East Africa, Karachi, Mumbai. So they returned home. But then there was the economy was money order economy. So they were running out of their funds. So many women preferred to, that was the time when Gulf needed women folks to work as ayahs. Gulf was getting richer because of petrodollars. And many women went to Gulf, Kuwait and other places, mainly Kuwait, and they were the women folks. First to go were women folks. Then the men followed, and now today the situation is changed. But that was the time when women who went and worked at Arab houses as maids, they had to suffer a lot of sufferings. They were subjected to sexual abuses also from their bosses. But it was always pushed under the carpet. I think this is the first novel from, not only from Goa and from Konkani, but from other parts of India also. Though there are many Punjabis and many people from Kerala, they have gone there. But this topic, so sensitively, nobody has touched upon, I think. But it's all due to the village and people of the village.
I remember something that you mentioned to me some time back about your first story, when the editor responded to your story. And that scene is something that's, etched in my mind. After writing for 50 years, it's very nice to look back and just, recall that incident. If you may, please.
I was doing my college and I had come back home during the summer vacation. And one day after lunch, I was sitting in the veranda. There is a chair and table which I'm very fond of. So I was sitting there and I had the urge to write, but I did not know what to write. And then suddenly the entire ambience, it was afternoon around 2:30 and 2 o'clock, I think. And it was very hot summer, month of May. So suddenly I was inspired to take to pen. I started writing. I finished by 4 o'clock. And then I was, once I finish a story, I want someone to read it. Right now, my first reader is my wife. But that time I was still college going and my mother was illiterate. So I could not share with anybody. I cycled to Margao, left the story on the, I wanted to see the editor. But the editor's office was empty. Nobody was there. I just left it on his table and returned home. Next day afternoon, somebody told me, somebody is calling you outside. So went out, I found one man on his bike, motorbike, is calling me. So I went, I recognized him as the editor. He said, you came to Margao yesterday? I said, yes. You came to my office? Yes. You left some story there? I said, who has written it? And he accosted me. He didn't, there is no admiration in his voice. He was accosting me. Who wrote it? I said, I have written it. Have you copied somebody? I said, no, why? Then, he got down from the motorbike and just gave me a hug, very tight hug. And coming from an editor, I was just maybe about 18 years old, and he was in his 40s. But you can imagine. So that, gave a lot of encouragement to me.
It's a wonderful incident, and I always, recall this whenever we talk about his writing. The other thing I wanted to ask you, now that we talked about, how was your childhood and the kind of society and so on, there is a story in this collection, which is, the last story. It's called Not My Business, right? It's Not My Business. And it's a story set in current times and more political. Of course, Damodar Mauzo has been activist for over 5 decades, and also he has been more active and vocal in the recent past as well. Now, this story is something unusual, something something about reflects our current times. Would you like to say something about it?
No, I think it's a
Not in terms of explaining the story, but something.
No, there is no activism in it. It is the reflection of what is happening now. Now, in sense, then when I wrote it, it was when the lynching was very happening and a lot of abuses were taking place. So I was prompted to write this. But then I think real activism is in that where you take the message without making it obvious. So here, I remember when Sudhir Kakkar, the psychoanalyst, once told me, the best way to reach out to the readers is through stories. If you give them a sermon, if I give you a lecture, probably I will not be able to convey what I feel. But when I write a story and when it is read, many things are told without even their knowledge. So that is why I prefer to write that story. Yeah, I think
It's
time is coming
yeah, I
closer.
think we are coming to an end. I think we have maybe a couple of minutes. Uh, just before we close, there is a wonderful story in this collection which is called Gentleman Thief. It is that story cannot be discussed. It cannot be explained. You have to only read that story. And I was asking him, how did that story come to you? And as we were conversing, then he also felt they just come to him. So I was telling him that if I make him sit here, and the way his stories are, the flow and the way they are written and the characters are formed, I was telling him if I make him sit here and give him a sentence, he will just write and finish the story. Because he is that kind of a writer where, it just flows, a sentence after sentence after sentence, it flows and the characters are formed. Similarly, there is a story, this burger story, which is again, I think, set in a Catholic family, and it's wonderful because there are not many writers who can write about about the family and the society which is outside them, and which is not their own caste, not their own religion, and Mauzo is one such wonderful writer. Um, is there, when it, about coming back to your craft of writing, you said you generally write in one shot,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What does that process look like? I mean, what is that experience? Is it something you are possessed? Is it something that comes to you? You think about it? How does it happen?
Well, please don't take it as a writer boasting about his process. Every writer has his own process, and one is not less important or more important like that. But then, yes, right from beginning, I have been waiting for the inspiration to come to me, the story to come to me, and once I start writing, I may spend some time on pondering over the names of the characters and where to start with. But once I start, I don't stop until it is over. Initially, I would finish once. The name of my collection, second collection, is Jagrana. Jagrana is late nights, and I would close my shop, come home. After the lunch is over, dinner is over, my wife and children are going to sleep, then I would start writing. So 10 o'clock, 10:30 I start, and by 2:30 in the morning or 3 o'clock, sometimes even 4, but sometimes early, I finish the story. And I don't have to look back to the story. It is not, I'm not boasting, but one thing is sure, you will not find a single word which is not necessary has entered my story, or any story, any one word that is left out because of some pressure or other. So once it is done, it is over. I never touch it again. But it is not I'm not going to boast about it. It's the process. Every writer has his own process. You may have your own process. But then even Carmelin, which is about 250 pages, I finished in 20 days. My Tsunami Simon, another novel, 150 plus pages, I finished in 4.5 days. If you are inspired to write, and if you don't have anything else to bothering your mind, then it won't take long. That is the way I write, and I would rather prefer you to speak about my stories. So you please buy the books and decide yourselves.
Thank you so much, and congratulations for the book, and thank you all for being with us patiently. Thanks.
Thank you, Vivek, and thank you everybody for giving a patient hearing. Thank you very much.